Alrighty folks, welcome back to another video from Yates Computers Tips and Reviews. So this one's going to be another one about cases to follow up with my 2022 end of year 2023 starter videos where I talked about motherboards, memory, add-on cards. Well, when I got into add-on cards, it got into cases. So I wanted to go through this factor again with add-ons, cases, motherboards, all kind of intermix. Because I got into memory, how many slots, I've kind of covered that, where they're at. You can kind of tell there's a difference between these two cases. Add-on cards. How many slots you actually have, what kind of slots you actually have. So that's a huge variable there. Over here, there's two slots. There's one basically for video card and one PCI. These are the older slots, depending on what kind of card you have. Of course, if you're buying a more modern computer, you're going to have the more modern ports. Boils down to how many of these you actually have. Again, SATA. How many SATA drives you can actually add to the actual motherboard? How many M.2 ports, slots do you have on the motherboard? All these factors can come into play. Some of these older ones actually do have an M.2 drive port that's actually located under here. When you take this off, there's a slot. So some of these models that are very similar to this design actually have that. But again, you're going to be buying a new one here probably within the next year, this year, or probably already have because of Windows 11. Due to the minimum standards for Windows 11. And the performance is going to be so much greater with these newer systems. So knowing what future developmental growth factors you can have on that computer is really helpful. If you go out and you buy a custom built or you're looking at a pre-built, to know what's in it, look at the specs, look at how it tells you what's on the motherboard, how it is. Leads me back to cases. Cases are really one of the weird issues that are out there. Talked about the depth of the cases and the plates. Sometimes you have to change it. So this one here, let's say it has the new modern ports and you bought a new video card that takes up bays, 2 bays. Bays are these. Takes up 2 bays. That means you cannot put anything else in here. Even though you have another slot. Unless it's a specifically engineered card that will go in that slot that don't take up any bays. Like a memory add-on or something that just plugs right into that, but does not need the external bay in the back. That's very, very rare, especially nowadays, because this bay has a clip that actually supports it and holds it in place. So that's one of the main factors of having these bays on the back. Again, this one has a video card in it. Has an adapter for dual HDMIs. I did not think it would work on such an old video card as this, but it does work. In here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bays. So you can actually put a bigger video card in there and still have space for other items. Again, you would have to look at where these are. If this is going to take up 2 bays up or down, depending on where the slot is on that video card, you would actually end up losing this and that, or losing the bottom one and this. So you cannot fill all those. Not to mention, if you have fans like the new ones, you may not want to put a big full-size add-on card like this in there. because that's going to restrict the airflow. So you're going to have to look at certain things like that. So there's certain little factors with these add-on cards and cases that you want to be aware of. Some of them, you could put the video card in there like vertically, and well, then you don't have really hardly any base space depending on where it's at. So all these little factors you want to look at. Leads you back to cases. Leads you back to what you want to do with it. You know, 4-port NIC, single port NIC, dual port NIC. Whatever you need to do, you can do. Add USB ports, you can add a lot of things. And again, some of this is important, like the bays in the back, because if the motherboard supports adding on things like card readers, adding on USB where they go onto the bay, you're going to need that bay. You're not going to need the port, because there'll be a cable that runs from there to there that plugs into that slot. So these are some of the little factors that I did not cover in some of the other videos that I wanted to cover now, is understanding the importance of a silly thing as the bays in the back. Because your motherboard might be able to support a lot of things, adding FireWire, adding USB ports, adding a lot of things right onto the motherboard. You plug right into the motherboard in a socket, the line comes out, but where it comes out, odds are will be added here. So if you put in a big video card in your only 2 bays, you can't add that USB even though you have the port, because your bays are full. Some people jerry-rig and cut holes and do all kinds of other things, but you don't want to do that to your case. Not to mention, you block the airflow. You cause airflow issues. You have other issues when you do that. So, I wanted to go through and actually show this factor as for how it relates to add-on cards. Because you never know when you might want to add an add-on card. This is actually an actual server. A server case, server chassis, server platform. Doesn't mean you can't use it as a workstation. Depends on what CPU you got in it. What OS you got in it. If you don't have a Celeron, you're in an i5, i7, i9, you can use it as a workstation. Put in basic Windows and go with it. Depending on if your motherboard and the drivers are supported in the OS, and most of that is nowadays. Then you have your base. What if you wanted to add the old keyboard and mouse that isn't there? Maybe the very old keyboard, the big round one. You might be able to find an add-on card. People like some of those things for certain reasons. So you have these bays. Depending on the motherboard that's in there, and if you can actually plug right to the motherboard for extra USB headers and all of that type of stuff, FireWire, USB-C, all of these other things that you could possibly add onto that motherboard, you're going to need bays. So it's not only just for the add-on cards. And that's one of the things that I did not touch on a whole lot of when I talked about the motherboards. Making sure you know what's on the motherboard. Okay, now you know what's on the motherboard, but how do you use it? How do you get it so you can actually use it? Some motherboards actually come with the insert with the cable that you attach to the motherboard. So you open it up and go, I can add more, I can add this. But if you didn't buy the right case and you don't have enough base to support it because you bought something small or super mini, you might end up with an issue. So this is where I wanted to go through and do a quick video and actually show these things. Because these are things that can come up in the future, present, now, past, anything you have. So I wanted to go through and show that, because sometimes you have these here too on the front. Sometimes you can actually find an insert bracket or an insert multi-card readers could go in here. Some of the old computers that I had, you'd open up the floppy bay and put it in there, or sometimes it would go in the bigger drive. Just slide in, has the cable that comes out, you attach it to the board. So this is another factor that I wanted to kind of cover on your computers. You buy something small like that, you don't have that future growth on the front either. Some of them have the older fashioned, bigger drives in there. Most of them are going to the smaller, thinner drives. But sometimes if you don't need a DVD, USB, any kind of thing on the front, you could take that out, replace it with something else, and buy inserts or fillers, spacers to make it fit in there. So these are some of those things I wanted to cover and with this, because talked about the motherboard, but did not really show, okay, now you got the motherboard that has all the bells and whistles. Where does it go? How does it go? How do you hook it up? Where does it plug in? There's a lot of things that were plugged in. Like these go into the USB here that plug into the motherboard. For some reason they were unplugged, probably because they don't want anybody plugging USB in to a server for security reasons. So that's another little factor that it's on the case. Maybe you don't want someone using it. Unplug it. Maybe you need to add more USB. There's a lot of people using a lot of USB out there. So this is where I wanted to go through and show the difference. I know it's a pretty short little video, but I hope it's enough detail for everybody to really understand the bays and add-ons due to what you have on your motherboard. You can actually get everything you pretty much need on a motherboard nowadays, and there's add-on cards and there's other things, add-on pieces that go on the bays that you need to be attached to the motherboard so you can plug into externally into the internal. So I wanted to cover that because I know I did not cover that. I did not go into any detail on that. And that's where cases come into play. Not to mention, cases come into play due to what the motherboard is and what size and what form factor it is. You want to make sure it fits in that case. And then it goes back to the power supply. Making sure you have the proper power supply with enough connectors that you can actually hook everything up. If you need to add, I think this one has 2 ATI plugs on top and 4 down lower. That's 6 drives. Do you actually have 6 power cables? And where are those drives going to be located? And are they going to be able to reach? Of course, you can buy extenders, you can buy splitters, you can buy other little things. But you want to know all of this. You want to make sure you're aware of that with your power supply. So these are some of those little tiny factors that come into play. And again, I mentioned video cards. How many power does it take to your video card? That also has to be a factor on your power supply. So I hope that explains everything that has to do with the other ones, how it relates to your case. This isn't, is it a server, not a server? None of that is a factor. This is about your case, your motherboard, your add-on cards, whatever you're going to need to connect to that motherboard, and how, what faces, plates, whatever you're going to need to be able to use those resources on your motherboard. Some of them come with the standard USB, and you can add USB-C, plug in, add the slot to somewhere, usually the back, in one of those bays, and you can add the USB-C. Nowadays, USB-C is kind of becoming more standard. It's actually coming on the cases or on the motherboards, so you can actually get that all integrated. But it might actually be an add-on card. So, wanted to go through that. Thank you all very much for watching. I know I've gone on long enough about a simple little factor like this, but I wanted to cover it because it relates to all the other videos. Alrighty, thank you so much.